This book is unique in that it was a work created out of happiness that turned into an expression of grief. A collection of philosophy compared to Nietzsche's Zarathustra, combined with Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm type fairy tales, and a narrative that confronts the idea of loss, the idea that everyone we love will die. Perfect for the holidays. Better than food, man. Hello everyone, welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. What's up? How's it going? Great to see you as always. How you doing? It's been a little bit. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. It's cold. Nothing some strong coffee can't fix. All right, what do we got for today? This was a gift from Luke, who is a very generous patron of the show. And I just want to say thank you, Luke, because this is a great discovery. I like obscure stuff, but I had never heard of Marcel Schwob, the tremendously influential fin de siècle French author. Chances are you probably haven't heard of him either. So I'd like to introduce you, because all of the puzzle pieces are starting to fit together. We're starting to be able to trace back the books that I've reviewed that I've been really enthusiastic about all the way back to their origins and the people who have influenced them. And it's a lot of fun. So today we have a very sad and beautiful story filled with many stories called The Book of Monelle. And it's all about death, of course. Depressing French literature. Hey, you know where you are, right? But let's talk a little bit about Schwob. Alfred Jarry dedicated Ubu Roi, King Ubu, to Schwob. Oscar Wilde dedicated his poem The Sphinx to Schwob. Several authors I love were influenced by him, more than several. Schwob influenced Faulkner. Borges's A Universal History of Infamy was influenced by Schwob. It was inspired by Schwab's Imaginary Lives. André Breton of the Surrealists said that Schwab's Words of Monelle was one of the earliest instances of the surrealist principle of l'anarchisme noir. And even Roberto Bolaño said that a young writer studying the art of the short story should, above all, read Schwob. It's amazing I've never heard of him. So Schwob was a scholarly, pre-surrealism French symbolist author. He was influenced by Baudelaire's translation of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, which he read when he was 11, along with Aladdin, Bluebeard, and Robinson Crusoe. His other books, which I've not read, this is my first, seem to be composed out of recycling things that he read or studied. I never composed a single one of my books, he said. While Monelle, the translator, has said, seems to be much more personal. The translator of the Book of Monelle, Kit Schluter, quoted Schwab's biographer, Pierre Champion, and said, Marcel Schwob did not believe in the gift of imagination, and to say it plainly, in originality. He knew that all had been said and forgotten. His art was crafted with the gift of choice and amalgamation. He discovered the origin of all his books. He was not unaware that his were works made out of the debris of many others. It's a very interesting perspective. Like, nothing is really that original. When you're that studied, when you're that scholarly, when you're that well-read, yeah, I can imagine that you really start to put together the pieces and it's like, oh, well, actually, these things that I thought that were really original really aren't at all. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I mean, Schwob seems to have played with it in a very interesting manner, although I haven't read his other stuff, like I said. He went on to influence Borges, which is who I really think about when I think of that kind of technique for telling or writing stories, crafting stories. So, it isn't a disaster that everything's been done, which is good in our case. Schwob was friends with Aleister Crowley, Oscar Wilde, Colette, Octave Mirbeau, who wrote The Torture Garden, amazing book, Verlaine, Proust, the list goes on. Very social guy. In his lifetime, he was very well known. Had a lot of friends. But while she was alive, it seems that none of Schwab's friends knew about his relationship with Louise. Kit Schluter is the skillful translator of this little masterpiece and referred to the Book of Monelle as an aesthetically anesthetized rearrangement of a lived experience. This is because while Schwob was writing this, he was watching a woman he loved named Louise die from tuberculosis. They met when he was 24 and she was 23. He didn't tell his friends. She was a working class woman and may have been a prostitute. Schwob wrote her stories, simple stories featuring protagonists who were little girls. But as her illness grew worse, the stories grew darker. The adult world, with all of its cruelty and death and pain and misery, sort of infected the narratives. And the result, after she passed away and the book was restructured, is the Book of Monelle. Nothing remains of Louise except for one letter that escaped the flames, possibly by accident. And those flames were lit by Schwob. He burned all of her letters. He burned everything. He tried to forget her. He thought that if he could forget her, maybe he could find her again. Their relationship, the beautiful parts and the horrifying, was what inspired the Book of Monelle. The Paris Review called it a groundbreaking work of decadence, an assemblage of fairy tales, nihilist philosophy, and aphorisms tightly woven into a tapestry of deep emotional suffering. It becomes the unofficial Bible of the French symbolist movement. Well put. This book is unique in that it was a work created out of happiness that turned into an expression of grief. A collection of philosophy compared to Nietzsche's Zarathustra, combined with Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm type fairy tales, and a narrative that confronts the idea of loss, the idea that everyone we love will die. Perfect for the holidays. As Schluter writes in the afterword, which is excellent, the little girls in the book teach the narrator this lesson, which is the same lesson that Louise, in real life, was teaching Schwob. Schwob gave these stories to Louise, and she loved them, for she was at the heart of each one. These young girls understood the world as Schwob had when he was young and hidden away in his attic. They, too, lived in the company of Robinson Crusoe, Bluebeard, and Aladdin. But in the stories, their belief in fairy tales led them astray, and there was no place for fairy tales in the world of adults. But somehow, hopefully, contrary to the impression I've given, it's more beautiful than depressing. Simple, dreamlike fairy tales with complex adult insight. I feel like the whole thing could be a Bresson-paced film with a soundtrack by Tim Hecker. Yes, it's believable that it came from the mind of someone who is in the middle of some deep suffering. But there's something hopeful about it, sometimes peaceful. But then at other times it's truly dark. Yeah, it was originally a bunch of random stories that he created for Louise. He went back after her death and composed it into 3 parts. They're connected by this character based on her that Schwob named Monelle. The first part is called The Words of Monelle. This is the chapter of philosophical aphorisms where the book starts. And while I enjoyed all parts of the book, this was my favorite. It was written close to the time of Louise's death, and it shows. And Monelle said again, "Because I am alone, you shall give me the name Monelle," as in Monelle, her. There's not quite a proper translation as Schluter said, but Monelle. "Because I am alone, you shall give me the name Monelle, but you shall imagine that I have every other name. And I am this one and that one and she who has no name." Skipping forward a bit here. "And you yourself shall find me, and I shall find myself, and you shall lose me, and I shall lose myself. For I am she who is lost as soon as she is found. Wait not for death. It is within you. Be its partner and hold it close to you. It is much like you. Die your own death. Envy not deaths of the past. Vary the genres of death with the genres of life. Take for living all that is uncertain, all that is certain for dead." Oh, that's great. I didn't remember that one. I just flipped over this page, and that's such a great line. The second part is called The Sisters of Monelle. This is a collection of short, evocative, somber, and melancholy fairy tale-like stories about girls and women inspired by stories like Cinderella and Bluebeard. They have titles like The Selfish and The Fated, The Dreamer, The Disappointed. The Numb, one of my favorites as an N-U-M-B, The Numb, reminded me of the short story by Borges called Hakim the Masked Dyer of Merv, which was part of his collection A Universal History of Iniquity, or Infamy, which was inspired by Schwob, and you can definitely see that connection. There's a great podcast, too, that I'll link to. It takes place at City Lights, this talk at City Lights, where Kit Schluter and another poet, I think, are discussing the Borgesian connection and the influence that he took from him. You can definitely see the influence on Borges, and I thought that was interesting because it always seemed to me that Borges was totally off doing his own thing, and he was really unique and original. And I mean, this is basically it, you know, the whole kind of collage or the recycling of things from old texts or sources, obscure sources, like putting them all together and basically plagiarizing and then just collecting all these things and stitching them together in a patchwork of a narrative to create something new. That didn't start with him. So this is, I don't know where it started, but this is maybe here. Schwob was doing it, at least in the late 1800s. So it's very interesting. The third and final part of the book is just called Monelle. This is all about the unknown narrator's encounter with Monelle and the group of children she leads who have banded together in a collective departure from the work-oriented world of adults, of grown-ups. Monelle is introduced as this little girl who is selling lamps in the rain. And here the book really takes on a somber, dreamlike quality, as the children's journey to escape ends in tragedy and Monelle dies. They can't escape the world, or reality. They can't escape reality, and so, of course, the children start dying, but then the others just move on. The symbolism is so dark, but it's still, a beautiful book. It ends on a semi-hopeful note as the narrator escapes with this woman named Louvette, but it seems like a tragic acceptance of the inevitable cycle of life and death. The book started one way, and then through this horrific experience of watching Louise die, Schwab's book transformed into something very dark. The girl Monelle leads these children who desire to avoid work, to live in the lie and avoid truth at all costs. Because, as they put it, to us all desire is new, and we desire no more than the untruthful moment. All memory is true, and we have renounced the truth. And we regard work as fatal, since it arrests our life and renders it identical to itself. And for us, every habit is pestilent, for it keeps us from offering ourselves entirely to the emergent lies. Such were the words of she who was guiding us. Except for one letter, there is nothing else that remains of Louise, one of the loves of Schwab's life, except the Book of Monelle. And that's beautiful. That's better than food. Can you imagine? Jesus Christ. So who should read it? Anyone who loves anybody mentioned in this review. Borges, Bolaño, Faulkner, Wilde, Octave Mirbeau, any of the French surrealism, Breton, any of that stuff, fin de siècle era stuff, anything experimental, poetry, Rimbaud, Verlaine, Proust, any of that stuff, any and all of that. Surrealists, symbolists, Dadaists, probably anything modernist or postmodernist or existentialist, anything with those titles, you'll probably find yourself right at home with this one. Any type of experimental literature or poetry, if you like that stuff, check this out immediately. It's cool to see where all that stuff came from, who inspired who influenced who. And it's amazing that this has resurfaced, so a big thanks to Kit Schluter for translating this and for finding this. So who's gonna get it for the Book and Coffee Lottery? For those of you who are new, the Coffee Lottery is where I take all the patrons who have donated $5 or more on Patreon and I place their names inside this mason jar and I pull out a name for every review I do, and whoever's name I pull out, I send them a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing plus a bag of delicious coffee roasted by yours truly. And oh, it's so good. I love it. So if you would like to get in on that, you can go to patreon.com/books-are-better-than-food and donate $5 or more per video. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who has donated to the show already, and best of luck to all of you. Okay, here we go. Aisha. Thanks a bunch, Aisha. Really appreciate it. Aisha is a very generous and longtime supporter of the show, so very happy to send this off to her. I think she's going to enjoy it quite a bit. Please subscribe if you haven't already for more book reviews, and please hit the like button if you enjoyed this. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And always remember, die reading. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for watching. Have a good night, and talk to you soon. Ciao.